As a concerned mother and father saw their daughter returning from school, their hearts stopped at the devastating sight before them. Their little girl was walking home from the bus wearing only a diaper, trembling with shame and fear. The father immediately rushed outside, wrapping his daughter in a protective embrace as she sobbed, desperate to understand what had happened. When the girl revealed the truth about her teacher and the other terrible things he had done to her, the father's world crumbled, and her words sent shivers down his spine. But the teacher had no idea who the little girl's father actually was. Soon, he would be begging for mercy and regretting his actions bitterly. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen curtains as David Carter sat at the dining table with his wife, Ava. At 40 years old, David had the weathered look of a man who had seen his fair share of life's challenges. As they sipped their coffee and discussed the day ahead, the sound of footsteps on the stairs caught their attention. Their daughter, Mia, shuffled into the kitchen, still clad in her pajamas. Her eyes were heavy with sleep, and her normally bouncy curls hung limp around her face. David and Ava exchanged a concerned glance as Mia slumped into a chair at the table. "Sweetheart," Ava began gently, "you do remember it's a school day, right? Not the weekend." Mia nodded glumly but made no move to get up. David set down his coffee mug. "Come on, kiddo, you need to get ready for school. Go on up and change, we are almost late." Instead of complying, Mia looked up at her parents with pleading eyes. "I don't want to go to school today," she said in a small voice. "I don't feel good." Ava immediately rose from her chair and approached her daughter. With practiced ease, she felt Mia's forehead, cheeks, and the back of her neck. Her eyes scanned Mia's skin, looking for any signs of illness. "You don't have a fever, sweetie," Ava said, her brow furrowed in concern, "and your skin looks fine." "But I don't feel good," Mia insisted, her voice taking on a whining quality. "My skin hurts when you touch it." As Mia spoke, her eyes darted to the side, and she glanced down at her lap. David recognized the telltale signs of a lie. He'd seen enough of them in his line of work to spot them easily, even in his own daughter. With a sigh, David stood and approached Mia and Ava. He crouched down to Mia's eye level, his voice firm but not unkind. "Mia, do you remember what we talked about? What's the consequence for lying?" Mia's shoulders slumped further. "No screen time for a whole week," she mumbled. Ava placed a hand on David's shoulder. "Let's not jump to conclusions," she said softly. "It's still morning, and she might just be tired. Remember how late you two were up last night with that math homework?" David nodded, recalling the frustration on Mia's face as they'd worked through problem after problem. Ava continued, addressing Mia. "How about we get you to bed earlier tonight, or maybe you could take a nap after school if you're still feeling tired." Mia hesitated, then said in a barely audible voice, "That's not why." David raised an eyebrow. "No? Are you sure it's not because you're tired from our study session? You have math class today, don't you? Do you remember what we went over last night?" Mia fidgeted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable. David pressed on, his voice gentle but firm. "We know you don't like math, honey, but you can't just call in sick because you don't like a subject. Sometimes we all have to do things we don't enjoy. That's part of growing up." After a long moment, Mia nodded reluctantly. "I'm sorry for lying," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Without another word, she pushed back from the table and trudged upstairs to get ready for school. As Mia's footsteps faded, David and Ava shared a worried look. "You don't think she's being bullied again, do you?" Ava asked, her voice tight with concern. David shook his head. "I don't think so. Remember, those kids who were causing trouble were suspended months ago, And the school's been really proactive with that new whistleblower program on the parent-teacher app. If something was going on, I think Mia would tell us, or other students would have blown it up on the app. Ava nodded, though she didn't look entirely convinced. You're right. It's just, she hasn't acted like this in a long time. Not since last year. I know, David said, running a hand through his hair, but I think it really is just the math. We started a new chapter last night, exponents and roots. It's pretty challenging stuff for her grade, and Mia was really struggling to grasp the concepts. As they discussed the situation, both parents tried to push away the nagging feeling that there might be more to Mia's reluctance than just difficult schoolwork. But for now, they had to focus on getting their daughter ready for the day ahead. 10 minutes passed, and the house remained eerily quiet. David glanced at the clock on the wall, then back at Ava. With a nod of understanding, Ava headed upstairs to check on Mia while David returned to the dining table to finish his breakfast. As Ava entered Mia's room, she found her daughter dressed for school, but sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at something in her lap. Upon closer inspection, Ava realized it was one of Mia's diapers. Mia, sweetheart, Ava said gently, why aren't you wearing your diaper? You know you need to. Mia looked up, her eyes brimming with tears. Mom, I'm 7 years old, she said, her voice trembling. None of my friends wear diapers anymore. I don't want to wear them either. Ava's heart ached for her daughter. She sat down on the bed beside Mia, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. I know it's hard, sweetie, she said softly, but remember, you're not wearing them because of your age. It's because of your medical condition. So, is there something wrong with me? Mia asked. Ava took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. You see, your bladder doesn't always send the right signals to your brain, which makes it harder for you to know when you need to use the bathroom. The doctors say you might outgrow it in a few years, but for now, the diapers help keep you comfortable and dry. Mia sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. But why now? Ava asked, puzzled. You've never refused to wear them before. What's changed? I'm not a baby, and the diaper makes me itch, Mia insisted, her voice rising slightly. And I hate how my pants look all bulgy. My friends don't have to deal with this. Ava hugged her daughter close, her mind racing. I have an idea, she said after a moment. How about we go shopping after school today, just you and me? We can look for some slimmer diapers that won't be as noticeable under your clothes. Would that help? Mia considered this for a moment, then nodded hesitantly. Okay. Ava said, relief evident in her voice. For today, though, can you please wear your regular diaper? Just for me? With clear reluctance, Mia finally agreed. After Mia finally agreed to wear her diaper, Ava helped her finish getting ready, making sure her backpack was packed and her shoes were on. As they headed downstairs, they found David by the front door, already putting on his work shoes. Come on, kiddo, he called, checking his watch. We need to get moving. Mia hurried to put on her shoes, while Ava quickly packed some toast in a lunchbox. Eat this in the car, she told Mia, handing her the box. With a quick kiss goodbye from Ava, David and Mia rushed out the door and climbed into the car. As they pulled out of the driveway, Ava watched them go, a mixture of worry and love etched on her face. The drive to school was unusually quiet. Mia focused on eating her breakfast, barely responding to David's attempts at conversation. He tried to review some of the math concepts they'd covered the night before, and while Mia answered his questions correctly, her responses lacked their usual enthusiasm. As they pulled into the school parking lot, David turned to his daughter. Hey, he said softly, you don't need to worry about math class today. You're doing great. Just remember what we went over last night, okay? Mia nodded silently and climbed out of the car. David watched as she walked toward the school entrance, her steps slow and hesitant. He couldn't help but notice how she kept patting the back of her skirt and adjusting her backpack, as if trying to hide something. With a sigh, David checked his watch. He had some time before he needed to be at work, and something about Mia's behavior didn't sit right with him. Making a split-second decision, he got out of the car and followed his daughter at a distance. David hung back as Mia entered the school, careful not to draw attention to himself. He watched as she joined the queue at the reception desk to register her attendance, her shoulders hunched and her movements hesitant. As he stood to the side of the entrance, allowing other students to stream past him, a familiar voice caught his attention. "Mr. Carter? Mia's father, right?" David turned to see Mr. Richard Calloway, Mia's new classroom teacher, approaching him with a friendly smile. David nodded, shaking the man's hand. "That's right. Good morning, Mr. Calloway." "I hope everything's all right," Mr. Calloway said, glancing toward where Mia had disappeared into the school. "Dropping Mia off yourself today?" David hesitated for a moment before deciding to voice his concerns. "Actually, I was wondering if you've noticed anything off with Mia lately. Any issues with bullying or strange behavior in class?" Mr. Calloway's brow furrowed in thought. "Nothing out of the ordinary that I've seen," he said after a moment. "Of course, I've only been her teacher for about 3 weeks now, but from what I can tell, she seems to be adjusting well. Is there any problem with Mia that I should be aware of, sir?" David shook his head, though he wasn't entirely sure himself. "It's just, she seemed really reluctant to come to school today. I thought maybe something had happened." "Ah," Mr. Calloway said, understanding dawning on his face. "You know, it might just be the math. We're getting into some pretty challenging material, and I recently put up a pop quiz. I've noticed a lot of students struggling a bit, not just Mia." "That's what I thought too," David admitted. "We were working on exponents and roots last night, and it was pretty tough going." Mr. Calloway nodded sympathetically. "Have you considered enrolling Mia in the after-school math program? It might help her feel more confident with the material." David shook his head. "I usually teach her at home in the evenings," he explained, "but maybe we should look into it if she keeps struggling." "Well, you're clearly an attentive father," Mr. Calloway said with a smile. "I'm sure Mia appreciates that. But really, I wouldn't worry too much. Lots of kids find math challenging, but they're all doing just fine." The school bell rang, and Mr. Calloway excused himself to head to class. David found himself feeling slightly more reassured. He watched as the last few stragglers hurried into the school, their backpacks bouncing against their shoulders as they rushed through the doors. With a deep breath, he turned to head back to his car, but a lingering sense of unease still clung to him. Maybe it was just the math, like Mr. Calloway said. But what if it wasn't? As he returned to his car and settled into the driver's seat, he drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. With one last glance at the school entrance, he decided to set the matter aside for now. Reminding himself that Mia was in a safe place now and there was no need to overthink the morning's incident, David began his transformation from concerned father to undercover narcotics detective. He suited up, slicking wax through his hair and fastening his holster around his waist, taking care to leave his service weapon unloaded, a precaution he always took when coming home, yet one that ensured a quick response if necessary. As he prepared for the day ahead, David's mind shifted from worries about his daughter to thoughts of the dangerous world he was about to re-enter. He was part of a task force dedicated to infiltrating drug distribution networks, and today's mission involved a sting operation at an abandoned warehouse. The drive to the operation site would take several hours, giving David plenty of time to mentally prepare. He thought about the strategies they'd developed to dismantle the cartel, the looming operation deadline, and the ever-present budget constraints. Just as he merged onto the highway, his phone rang. Glancing at the caller ID, he saw it was his boss, Senior Detective Mark Lawson. David answered, putting the call on speaker. "Carter here," he said, keeping his eyes on the road. "David, I'm sorry for the late notice," Mark's voice crackled through the speaker. "There's been a change in shifts. Any chance you could take the night shift instead of days?" David frowned. "What happened?" Mark sighed heavily. "One of our informants has gone missing. We're worried the cartel might be onto us, so we're postponing the morning operation. It's too risky to be near their warehouse right now. Plus, we need more officers for an unexpected night surveillance op at a different location. Looks like we found a fifth warehouse belonging to the cartel." David considered this for a moment. While the change was unexpected, part of him was relieved. His unease about Mia's behavior still nagged at him, and a night shift would allow him to be home during the day. "Actually, boss, that might work out better for me," David said. "I've got some family stuff going on. A night shift could be good." "I appreciate your flexibility, David," Mark said, relief evident in his voice. "I'll send you the details for tonight's operation. Make sure you read through the material I'm sending about this new warehouse. It's crucial we're all on the same page." After confirming the details and ending the call, David found himself with an unexpectedly free morning. He decided to head home, planning to review the operation materials from the comfort of his home office. As he passed the school again, he briefly considered stopping to check on Mia, but a glance at the clock showed it was only 9:30, still too early for recess. With a sigh, he continued on his way home, hoping that a quiet morning might help settle the nagging worry in the pit of his stomach. The familiar sight of his house came into view as David pulled into the driveway. He couldn't help but feel a sense of relief washing over him, knowing he had some unexpected time at home. As he entered, he was greeted by the surprised face of his wife. "David?" she questioned, a mix of concern and confusion in her voice. "Is everything all right? Why aren't you at work?" He explained the situation to her as they moved to the living room, settling onto the couch. "There's been a change in plans. I'm on night shift now, so I've got some time before I need to head out." Ava nodded, processing the information. "Well, I suppose that's not so bad. It'll be nice to have you home for a bit." She paused, studying his face. "How did drop-off go with Mia? Did she seem okay?" David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not sure, to be honest. She was so quiet in the car, and when we got to school, she just seemed off." Ava frowned slightly. "Did she say anything to you on the way?" David shook his head. "Not much. She answered my questions about math, but there was no enthusiasm. It was like she was just going through the motions." Ava looked down, deep in thought. "I just don't understand. If it's just the math, why does she seem so scared? Something doesn't add up." David leaned back against the couch. "I ran into her new teacher, Mr. Calloway. He said the same thing I thought, that it's just a tough subject and that a lot of kids are struggling with the new material. He suggested we consider enrolling her in an after-school program." Ava sighed. "I'm not sure Mia would like that idea. Couldn't you just keep teaching her at home?" David shook his head. "With more night shifts coming up, I won't be able to teach her as regularly. Maybe you could help her instead?" Of course, Ava agreed. We don't need to waste money on an after-school class she wouldn't enjoy anyway. As they continued to discuss Mia and her struggles with math, David's phone buzzed. It was the promised material from his boss about tonight's operation. He stood up. I should probably go upstairs and review this. Got to be prepared for tonight. Ava nodded understandingly as David made his way to his home office. The next few hours passed in a blur of reading, research, and an online team meeting to discuss the night's operation. By the time David finished, his eyes were strained from staring at the computer screen. He closed the window on his computer and headed downstairs, the aroma of lunch wafting up to greet him. As he entered the kitchen, he saw Ava busy preparing their meal, carefully plating Mia's favorite dish. A glance at the clock on the wall showed 12:20 p.m., Mia should be arriving home any minute now. Once Ava finished setting the table, she turned to David. I'm going to go change, she said. I promised Mia we'd go shopping for a new brand of diapers. David nodded, watching as she disappeared down the hall. He hoped the trip would help Mia feel more comfortable. As David made his way to the kitchen, true to his prediction, he caught sight of the school bus through the window. He watched as Mia stepped off, surrounded by the cheerful noise of her classmates. But as the bus pulled away, David's heart dropped. Something was wrong. Mia was walking towards the house, but she wasn't wearing her school skirt. She was in just her diaper. David rushed to the front door, throwing it open and running out to meet his daughter. He reached her halfway down the path, immediately wrapping her in a tight hug. Mia burst into tears, burying her face in his chest. Mia, sweetheart, David said, his voice shaking slightly. What happened? Where's your skirt? Mia just cried harder, unable to form words. Ava appeared at the door in her freshly changed dress, her face a mask of shock as she took in the scene before her. She rushed to join them, crouching down next to Mia. Baby, please tell us what's wrong, Ava pleaded, her voice gentle but urgent. We promise we won't be mad. We just want to help you. Did something happen at school? Who did this to you? It took several long moments for Mia to collect herself enough to speak. When she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. Mr. Calloway took my pants, she said. He said everyone should see that our kind wears diapers. Ava gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. David felt a surge of fury rise within him, his jaw clenching as he struggled to maintain his composure. This is unbelievable, David said, rubbing his eyes and the back of his neck nervously. I just talked with Mr. Calloway this morning. He didn't seem like the type who would do this. Mia looked up at them, her eyes wide and fearful. Please, she begged. I'm not lying. Please don't be mad at me. David hugged his daughter tighter, his voice firm as he repeated, You're sure Mr. Calloway did this? Your new teacher? Mia nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. He said if I told anyone what he's been doing, I'd get punished. That's why I was scared to go to school this morning. I'm sorry I didn't tell you before. David and Ava shared a look of horror and concern over their daughter's head. We believe you, sweetheart, Ava assured her, her voice thick with emotion. You've done nothing wrong. As they stood there on the front lawn, holding their trembling daughter, David felt a cold determination settle over him. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. He was going to find out what happened at school and why their daughter had been sent home in such a degrading way. The weight of Mia's revelation hung heavy in the air as David gently guided his family back into the house. Once inside, Ava immediately took charge, pulling Mia into a warm embrace and murmuring soothing words. She led her upstairs to her room, offering comfort as she helped her get changed. David, however, was a man on a mission. He followed them upstairs, bounding up the steps two at a time, and burst into his office next to Mia's room. With quick, precise movements, he grabbed his wallet, phone, and car keys, his mind racing. A potent mix of rage and protective instinct drove him forward. As he thundered back down the stairs, Ava looked up from where she was tending to Mia on her bed, her eyes widening as she took in his determined stance and the set of his jaw. "David," she began, her voice cautious. "What are you doing?" "I'm going to the school," he replied, his tone brooking no argument. "I'm going to handle this once and for all." Mia's head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear. "No, Dad," she cried out. "The teacher will punish me tomorrow." David stopped and walked into her room, crouching down in front of his daughter. His expression softened as he met her frightened gaze. "I promise you, sweetheart," he said, his voice low and intense, "that teacher will never be able to hurt you or anyone else again. I'll make sure he won't see tomorrow." As David straightened and turned towards the door, Ava's voice stopped him. "David," she said, her tone urgent. "Your holster. You still have your service weapon. You should take it off." David paused, his hand on the bedroom's doorknob. He turned to look at his wife, and the depth of anger in his eyes made her take a step back. Without saying a word, he shook his head. Then he strode downstairs, his steps quick and purposeful as he pushed open the front door. Ava followed quickly, catching up to him just as he was about to get into the car. "David, please," she pleaded, grabbing his arm. "Don't do anything stupid. This won't help anyone." But David was already closing the car door, his face set in grim determination as he sped away. Ava and Mia stood in the driveway, watching him go. David's heart raced with anger and frustration, not just for what might happen at the school, but for what this could mean for his daughter. As he drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his mind was a whirlwind of dark thoughts. He couldn't shake the image of his daughter, humiliated and scared, forced to ride the school bus home in just her diaper. The sound of children's laughter from the bus earlier echoed in his ears, and he imagined how mortifying it must have been for Mia. His thoughts turned to Mr. Calloway's face, the teacher he had spoken to just that morning. How could he have seemed so normal, so concerned about Mia's progress, when all along he had been tormenting her? What else had been happening to his daughter at school? How long had this been going on? As he pulled into the school parking lot, David took a deep breath, trying to calm the rage that threatened to overwhelm him. Before he stepped out, he glanced down at his holstered weapon. Then he reached into the glove compartment, where he kept the magazine. For a moment, his hand hovered over it. Temptation warred with his sense of duty. In the end, professionalism won out. He removed the weapon from his belt and stored it in the gun case in the glove compartment. This wasn't a situation that called for firearms. But that didn't mean he was any less determined to see justice done. With one last steadying breath, David stepped out of the car and strode towards the school entrance, his face set in a mask of grim determination. David pushed open the front doors of the school and stepped inside. The hallway was quiet, the usual morning rush having settled into the day's classes. He didn't hesitate as he strode toward the administration office, his every step fueled by the image of his daughter humiliated, crying, and afraid. The receptionist looked up as he approached. Her pleasant smile faltered slightly at his intense expression. "Mr. Carter?" she asked hesitantly. "Is everything all right?" "I need to speak to Principal Holloway. Now." The urgency in his voice left no room for argument. The receptionist quickly reached for the intercom but barely had time to announce him before Principal Holloway stepped out of her office, adjusting her glasses. "Mr. Carter," she greeted, her brows furrowing in concern. What brings you back? David didn't waste time. Where is Mr. Calloway? The principal blinked at the directness of his question. He's in class, she said slowly. Is something wrong? David exhaled sharply, trying to keep his temper in check. My daughter came home today without her skirt. Do you know why? The principal's face showed confusion, then concern. No, Because her teacher, Mr. Calloway, forced her to remove it, David interrupted, his voice cold and steady. Because he wanted to humiliate her. Because he said everyone should see that our kind wears diapers. A stunned silence filled the air. The receptionist gasped, bringing her hand to her mouth. Principal Holloway's face paled. Mr. Carter, that's an extremely serious accusation. You're damn right it is, David snapped. And I want him pulled out of that classroom immediately. The principal hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Come with me. David followed her down the hall, his fists clenched at his sides. As they neared the classroom, Principal Holloway slowed, as if steeling herself. She knocked firmly before pushing the door open. Mr. Calloway, may I have a word with you outside? Inside the classroom, the teacher looked up from where he stood at the whiteboard. For a fraction of a second, David saw something flicker across his face, annoyance? Fear? But then it was gone, replaced with his usual composed expression. Of course, Calloway said, setting down his marker. Class, continue working on the problems I assigned. He stepped out into the hallway, closing the door behind him. He barely had time to turn before David was on him. You want to explain to me, David said, his voice dangerously quiet, why my daughter came home today in nothing but her diaper? Calloway's expression remained calm. I'm not sure what you mean. She told me everything, David continued, his tone hardening. How you took her skirt. How you humiliated her in front of the other kids. How you threatened her. Calloway let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. Mr. Carter, children have such wild imaginations, don't they? I assure you, I did no such thing. David took a step closer, his presence towering over the teacher. You're calling my daughter a liar? Calloway shrugged. I'm saying kids misinterpret things. Maybe she had an accident, and I suggested she go to the nurse. Maybe she refused, embarrassed. These things happen. David's hands clenched at his sides. He wanted nothing more than to slam this man against the lockers, but he took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay in control. Principal Holloway cleared her throat. Mr. Calloway, if what Mr. Carter is saying is true, we need to investigate immediately. I agree, Calloway said smoothly. I'd be happy to cooperate. But I think we should be careful before we go throwing around accusations that could ruin a man's career. David's jaw tightened. This man was slippery, calculated. He knew exactly how to twist words, how to gaslight and manipulate. Then let's talk about your choice of words, David said, his voice deceptively calm. Tell me, why did you say our kind wears diapers? A flicker of something, panic, crossed Calloway's face, but he recovered quickly. I don't recall saying that, he said simply. David turned to Principal Holloway. Check the classroom cameras. At that, Calloway stiffened. His lips parted slightly before he caught himself. Well, he said, his voice suddenly a touch less confident, not all classrooms have active cameras. Then check the hallways, David pressed. See what she was wearing when she arrived versus when she left. Principal Holloway nodded, clearly shaken. I'll get our IT staff on it immediately. Calloway shifted uncomfortably. Is this really necessary? I mean, come on, the girl is 7. Maybe she lost her skirt on the way home. David took another step forward, voice low. You humiliated my daughter. You made her feel ashamed of something she can't control. And now you're trying to weasel your way out of it. But here's the thing, Calloway, I don't need cameras to prove what you did. Because my daughter isn't the only one you've hurt, is she? For the first time, Calloway's calm facade cracked. David saw it, the slight twitch in his jaw, the way his fingers curled against his side. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice lacked the same confidence. Oh, I think you do, David murmured. At that moment, a voice crackled over the school's intercom. Principal Holloway, please report to the security office immediately. Holloway gave Calloway one last wary glance, before turning on her heel and striding away. David watched the teacher closely. The way his Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. The way he shifted his weight slightly, as if preparing to bolt. David smiled grimly. He's nervous. Good. A few minutes passed before Principal Holloway returned. Her face was tight with fury. I just reviewed the hallway footage, she said, her voice sharp. Mia entered this building fully dressed. And she left in just a diaper. Calloway's composure shattered. His mouth opened, but no words came out. David exhaled, finally allowing himself to step back. That's all I needed to hear. Principal Holloway straightened her posture. Mr. Calloway, as of this moment, you are suspended pending a full investigation. Calloway turned red. You can't do that. I just did. 2 security guards approached, stepping on either side of him. You are to leave school grounds immediately, Holloway continued. You will not be allowed back unless this investigation clears you. Do I make myself clear? Calloway's jaw clenched, but he nodded stiffly. As the security guards escorted him away, David finally allowed himself to breathe. It wasn't over, but this was a start. Principal Holloway turned to him, her expression still troubled. Mr. Carter, I'm so sorry this happened. I promise we will do everything we can to get to the bottom of this. David nodded. I appreciate that. But I want full transparency. No covering things up, for the sake of the school's reputation. If this man has done this to other kids, I want to know. Holloway hesitated, then nodded. Understood. David ran a hand over his face. I need to get back to my daughter. Of course. As he walked back to his car, his mind was still racing. Calloway was clearly hiding something. The way he reacted, the way he tried to deflect. David had spent years reading people, spotting lies. And Calloway was lying. As he drove home, his grip on the steering wheel tightened. He would get to the truth. No matter what it took. David pulled into the driveway, his heart still pounding from the confrontation at the school. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the fury bubbling inside him. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. He stepped out of the car and made his way inside. The moment he opened the door, Mia rushed to him, her small arms wrapping tightly around his waist. He knelt down, hugging her close, feeling the way her little body trembled. It's okay, sweetheart, he murmured, stroking her hair. You don't have to worry about Mr. Calloway anymore. Mia pulled back slightly, looking up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. Is he gone? David nodded. Yes, he's gone. He won't be teaching at your school anymore. Ava stood nearby, arms crossed, watching him carefully. What happened? David stood up, exhaling. I confronted him. At first, he tried to deny it, but the security footage proved everything. The principal suspended him, and security escorted him off the premises. Ava let out a breath of relief, shaking her head. I still can't believe this happened. To our daughter. David looked down at Mia, gently cupping her face. You were so brave to tell us the truth. I want you to always remember that, okay? No matter what happens, you can always come to us. Mia nodded slowly. I was scared, Daddy. I know, baby. He kissed her forehead. But you don't have to be scared anymore. Ava sighed, rubbing her temples. What happens next? Will he be arrested? David hesitated. That depends. If they find more evidence, if there are other kids he's mistreated, then yes, he'll be charged. But I won't let this go, Ava. If there's more to this, I'll find it. Ava's expression was a mixture of concern and determination. I just want Mia to be okay. David looked at their daughter, who was still clinging to his side. He gently ran a hand through her curls. She will be. That evening, they tried to return to normalcy. Ava made Mia's favorite dinner, and they let her watch her favorite show before bed. But despite the comforting routine, David could tell that Mia wasn't herself. She was quieter, her usual excitement dimmed. As he tucked her in, he sat on the edge of her bed, watching her closely. Do you want to talk about anything? Mia shook her head. David reached out, squeezing her hand. It's okay if you're still scared. Or angry. Whatever you're feeling, it's okay. Mia hesitated, then whispered, what if he comes back? David's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice gentle. He won't. And even if he tried, I'd never let him near you again. Mia looked up at him, searching his face. After a moment, she nodded, reassured by the conviction in his voice. David leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I love you, baby girl. Love you too, Daddy. As he left her room, he found Ava standing in the hallway, arms crossed. She met his eyes. She's still scared. David nodded, running a hand through his hair. I know. Ava sighed. I hate this. I hate that she had to go through this. So do I. He hesitated, then said, I don't think this is the first time he's done something like this. Ava frowned. What do you mean? The way he reacted today. He was too smooth at first, too confident. Like he's talked his way out of trouble before. Ava's arms tightened around herself. So, what are you going to do? David's expression darkened. I'm going to find out the truth. The next morning, David made a call to one of his contacts at the police station. Officer Riley was a good friend, someone David trusted. Riley, he said when the officer picked up. I need a favor. There was a pause before Riley responded. This about that Calloway guy? David's grip on the phone tightened. You've heard? Yeah. Word gets around. The school reported it, but so far, no official charges. They're still gathering statements. David exhaled sharply. I need to know if he has a record. Anything suspicious in his past. Riley hesitated. You know I can't just pull someone's file for personal reasons. This isn't personal, David said. This is about making sure a predator doesn't hurt another child. Another pause. Then Riley sighed. Give me a couple of hours. David hung up and sat at the kitchen table, tapping his fingers against the wood. Ava came in, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Any updates? Waiting to hear back. She sat down across from him. I hate this waiting. So do I. Hours passed before David's phone rang again. He answered immediately. Talk to me. Riley sighed. You were right. This isn't the first time. David sat up straight. What did you find? There were complaints against him at a previous school. Nothing that led to charges, but enough red flags. Parents reported that he was overly harsh, humiliating certain students, making them feel small. There was even a complaint about inappropriate comments toward a young girl. David's grip on the phone was tight. Why wasn't he fired? The school let him resign quietly. David closed his eyes, exhaling through his nose. And no one warned this school? Apparently not. David's blood boiled. I want his full history. I'll send you what I can, Riley said. But you need to be careful. If you go digging too hard, you might spook him. David's lips pressed into a thin line. I want him to be scared. After the call, David shared everything with Ava. She covered her mouth, horrified. So he's been doing this for years? David nodded. And getting away with it. Ava's hands clenched. What do we do? David's gaze was cold, focused. We make sure he never hurts another child again. The next few days were filled with phone calls, meetings, and collecting information. David spoke to the principal again, demanding answers about how someone with such a history had been hired. He reached out to other parents, trying to see if any other children had experienced mistreatment. Little by little, a pattern emerged. Mia wasn't the only one. There were other kids. Other stories. Some were subtle, little humiliations, unfair punishments. Others were worse. One mother, eyes filled with unshed tears, told David how her son had started coming home from school quieter, withdrawn. How he had begged not to go back, but wouldn't say why. David clenched his fists. He knew why. It all built a case against Calloway. The day the police arrived at Calloway's house to arrest him, David was there, standing across the street, watching. He saw the moment Calloway stepped outside, saw the flash of panic when he spotted the officers. David crossed his arms as Calloway was handcuffed. Their eyes met across the distance. David didn't smile. Didn't smirk. He just stared, letting Calloway see the quiet satisfaction in his expression. Justice was finally being served. A few days later, as David sat on the couch, Mia climbed onto his lap, resting her head against his chest. Daddy, she murmured. Yeah, baby? Is he gone for good? David wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. Yes, sweetheart. He's gone for good. Mia let out a small, content sigh. Okay. David kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her shampoo. He closed his eyes, relief finally settling in. His daughter was safe. And he would make sure she always would be.